So what's up, Omnis? I am Ruminous, and today we are going over a review for the game Beyond Eyes. Beyond Eyes is a walking simulator with a unique concept. The game opens with a young girl, maybe about 8 to 10 years old, getting blinded by fireworks. Now, I researched this a bit to find, no surprise, some goons blinding themselves because they hold the explosive ball of light close to their face, underestimate the strength of the explosion, or hang on for too long. If it is not clear yet, fireworks are an explosive, so be careful when dealing with them. Anyway, Beyond Eyes has the girl blinded by one of the larger fireworks high in the sky that, you'll see at like stadiums or whatever, and I couldn't find any evidence supporting the accuracy of that. So, I'm not ragging on the game, I just wanted to let people know that fireworks in the high sky and all that stuff, they are not going to cause you a problem. They're not going to blind you. Don't be afraid of that. After getting blinded, the poor girl learns to navigate with some sort of echolocation, using sound and her other senses to fill in the beautiful world around her. She befriends a cat and wanders around her house with him, until one day the cat doesn't return after winter. The girl decides to roam literally across town to find the cat, assisted by some ethereal vision of the cat. You need to navigate the wooded and obstructed areas with your limited vision, avoid some misogynistic dogs, help a girl retrieve a ball, and deal with your nemesis. Heavy rain. But seriously, the rain blocks your vision and it's a real problem. The game will take about 2 to 3 hours to complete. There are a few parts where the path is obscure or the answer on how to progress is obscure, which can take a little more time depending on the player. There are a few like secrets and extra things you can do. I did them after doing this review, and I gotta say, it's not really worth your time. It'll take maybe an extra hour or so, but it doesn't really add anything to the game. For the gameplay aspect of control, the game is quite consistent with its two actions: walking using the analog stick or WSAD, and the interact button, which is used maybe about 4 or 5 times in the whole game. As such, the game is quite consistent. The controls listen and respond when I press them. The game has no issue with precision since there are no real verbs in the game. You can change direction when moving in an instant, so the precision in the game is flawless for what it needs to do. Since the character is blind, there's a bit of latency between the character interacting with things compared to when the player tells them to do it. It makes sense thematically, and it isn't true mark on the game, but I think there should be a sound or visual cue to alert the impatient players that the character is getting to it and we need to hang on to our sleeves. The game has a bit of an issue with frequency where it hardly uses the interact action, but walking is consistent. If you do some of the extra side quests and stuff, you will use the interact action a little more frequently, but still not that much. In honesty, because the interact action is used and almost always for opening a gate or crossing a step, it could have been scrapped and instead replaced by the player moving forward towards that object and interacting with it. It also becomes an issue when many gates open because of story elements rather than interacting with it, so there's really no reason to have the interact button except for the side stuff, which again, you could simply have the player walk into it. The interact action pretty much serves no purpose after the second chapter. The game gives full autonomy except for some very short encounters with threats, specific objects, or story elements. These last maybe about 10 seconds and are pretty clear to see and don't mess with the game. The character, obviously, moves at the speed of a hungover snail. It turns out that without sight, it's very difficult to navigate without running into everything. The only mark I will give against the speed, since it matches thematically with the game, is that when the player's already uncovered part of the map, the character should move slightly faster because sometimes you gotta backtrack. There are a few areas in the game where it's unclear which direction to go, and it's a bit of a nuisance to have to retrace. The camera is a free 3D camera. The view is large enough to see things ahead and plan the route accordingly. There are some parts in the game where objects block the view, but this is planned to make the level a little more difficult since there's no combat or puzzles really in the game. The view works well for the game. The game grows in terms of making the areas less easy to navigate so that there's some change, that there will be some dogs harassing you, a duck or frog may be chilling out somewhere to make the areas a little more interesting. The levels range from the woods to the city to a pier. It helps to diversify the areas and make the world change as you sluggishly walk around. You generally don't interact with anything besides a few places, so you'll spend 95% of the game just walking. The flow of the game is good for what it needs. The game generally gives 2 to 3 directions to move, and you need to find the correct one. Dogs will break up the path every so often to make the character shift direction again. There are 2 instances where the player needs to find that object to progress the game. For the ball section, it is unclear exactly where to go, since it seems that a character can climb a fence, and that can become an issue when I try to backtrack instead of moving forward, like I was supposed to. The rain section is mostly linear, since it would be frustrating to navigate while your view is constantly blocked, and I feel like it takes too long to get to the end. The flow generally follows a linear path and changes frequently enough to keep the player engaged, but there are some issues where it can kind of take too long and it kind of gets frustrating and just boring. The game, as you may guess, is not difficult. There is no combat, no time challenges, no fail states in the game. There are threats, but they just act as obstacles and won't hurt the character. The difficulty thus rests entirely on the visibility and pathways, but even then, it's not that difficult, as the diverging pathways are typically only 2 to 3 pathways, and the wrong ways are usually quickly blocked off. The game has some frustration as some pathways are in between obstacles and it's not easy to see all the time, but the frustration is minimal as well. Overall, the game manages to add some obstacles and extra content without overloading the game or making the game tedious. Since the game is only 1 to 2.5 hours of actual gameplay, it is sustainable. There is enough growth and proper flow to make the new levels new, even though no new gameplay aspects are added. There is a detrimental mechanic added for a chapter, and the visuals, although simplistic, are stunning enough. It keeps the attention for the whole game, doesn't draw out the story or levels, except for one part, and varies itself to not become stale too quickly. The story is told entirely in text, but there is only maybe about 300 words of text through the game. Some parts of the story are told in static images, such as the beginning where it tells how the girl was blinded by a fireworks show. Some text shows up after a new chapter, others during certain milestones in the level. The girl is lonely, but a cat shows up to befriend her until one spring it doesn't return after winter, where the story mentions that the cat rarely visits in winter anyway. Even with all that fur, the cold is miserable. The girl decides to venture out, all alone, through the woods, street, city, and boardwalk to find the missing cat. I do want to know where her parents are since she just wanders off without any supervision or care in the world. She has a sixth sense of locating the cat until she eventually finds him at the end of the game. About 75% into the game, we do meet another person whom we help get a ball back, and they show up at the end of the game in a nice callback to the original message, she received a visitor. The story doesn't divulge too much about the relationship between the girl and the cat, never goes into what they really did together or any fond memories, which is a mark against the story. Although it's not pivotal, we understand from the circumstances that the girl is attached to the cat and misses him dearly, but during our adventure together through the world, I feel like it would help the emotion and sustainability of the game to help show how much the cat meant to her besides as an only friend. There are a few moments where she recognizes things which he would do, showing that we are on the correct path. But people tend to love human-animal relationships because of the love and connection the two share throughout the show, game, or movie. It's not really shown enough for my liking. The game does end on a bit of a twist, which I honestly did not anticipate. I think it is actually a good ending since the game is about the relationships which Ray, the girl, has. It shows how life changes, what we are willing to go for others for whom we care, and how new relationships start. Now, it is no marvel of these themes, but it does a decent job of showing them in such a short period. The story is overall decent and simplistic and serves enough for the gameplay. The music in the game, when it shows up, is nice and relaxing, fitting to the theme of a relaxing walk. The music is not always prevalent, and there are plenty of times where the lack of music makes the game slightly stagnant or kind of boring. Although the sounds play a major part in her ability to navigate, I feel like it would be far better to have a faint piano roll or something in the background to help ease the silence. The sound effects in this game are well designed. The animals sound like they come from the animals they should. Cars, lawnmowers, boats, and all sorts of mechanics also sound realistic. Sound is ever present in the game, not too loud, and serves the theme of the game well. As mentioned, the game is a walking simulator, so there are not many mechanics either in the game. The mechanics are reliable, mostly. The area will reveal itself when nearby, dogs won't move or chase the character, frogs will be just out of reach, even though I desperately want to pet them. In the beginning, there is a gate that the player must open, but all other gates must be opened by someone else through a story moment rather than through my interaction, which caused an issue for me as I assumed I would have to open the gates, so it became an unreliable mechanic pretty early on. There are no manipulative mechanics in the game. Neither the game nor the player can make any changes to the game at will. Besides the guiding mechanics, which I'll explain a little bit, there are really not any mechanics assisting the player. The only assistant mechanic is that any area previously visited will remain visible as a mark that you've already been there. As for detrimental mechanics, there are some dogs that act as barriers to force the player to find an alternate route. There are some story events that also require finding a new path or removing an obstacle, but they are infrequent and not really a nuisance. One chapter has heavy rain which blocks out the areas previously discovered, which is a nice detriment and kind of change to the flow of the gameplay. To help guide the player along, there are often birds or frogs making a sound, which creates a bubble to signify where the correct path is. Most pathways in the wooded areas have dirt trails to lead you the correct way, and I noticed that sometimes the signs have arrows that also pointed to the direction that you should be going. This wasn't always the case, but there were enough guiding mechanics to tell you that the sign was correct or was not. Since there are only two controls in the game, walking and interacting, there are no really intuitive mechanics for the gameplay aspects since they are explained in game. For the mechanics, the guiding, detrimental, and assistive mechanics are all intuitive, as they are never directly taught. It forces the player to wait and see the world around them to understand these things, which aligns with the theme of being blind. The characters' different senses are also signified by different colors. Blue for sound, yellow for smell. It's never taught and honestly not important at all, but a nice touch for simple things to make the game feel unique and alive. The game is entirely based around the central disability of the character. She is blind and must take in the world through her other senses. At first, she only knows the immediate area around her house, as most blind people do, and everything beyond is obscure until she investigates it. Sudden, loud sounds are scary to her until her senses figure out that it's just a lawnmower or boat. Sometimes, even the threats, like a dog, are scary until she learns that the dog is barking at something else besides her, even though most are definitely trying to eat her face for some reason. I'm not a fan of dogs and like cats myself, but I don't consider dogs my enemy. I'm not sure why the dogs all hate blind little girls. The movement, speed, interactions, confusion, fear, and desire to have friends all match with a general sense of not being able to easily navigate the world or communicate or connect with those around you. The game has a slight tutorial. It explains the controls. That's right, all 2 controls, but does show the intuitive mechanics the entire time. I think the tutorial is fine, although the story could go more in depth about the relationship between the girl and the cat. It also shows another important intuitive mechanic and pivotal part of the level design. Not all parts of the level will be available from the beginning, and sometimes the player must activate another part of the story to progress in another area. Overall, it is decent in setting up the expectations and style of gameplay and mechanics of the game. The user interface and user experience of the game is simple to match the controls and theme. The colors are vibrant to differentiate themselves, impassable objects are large and surrounded by a dark cloud to contrast with the bright surroundings. There is no HUD or navigation, and I don't believe the game needs it, as the levels are short and pretty linear. There is only one menu in the game, and that is the pause/main menu. The options are highlighted and allow to select a chapter, start or quit the game, and general options. The options menu is a single menu with all possible selections in one area for ease of access. Overall, the user interface and user experience is well done and doesn't cause unneeded confusion or complications in the gameplay or settings. The style is vibrant and kind of surreal, and the graphics are low poly but realistic. The objects are easy to decipher and well made. The animals and character move realistically and match the style of the game. No animations were out of place or poorly done that I could tell. The visuals in the game are well done. The imagery and scenery are all beautiful due to the colors and natural atmosphere, but the style, graphics, and animation are very simplistic. The game has a few options for accessibility, but not much. The font is large enough with decent kerning and spaces between the words, and the text comes in single, short sentences often. Even for those who struggle with reading, there shouldn't be much of a problem with the text in the game. The color scheme can't be changed, which makes sense as most of it's based off the real world items, so all the green could pose a problem for those with green color blindness, but it supposedly shouldn't be something as they're used to seeing it and typically contrasts with everything else around it because the world is vibrant and has a bunch of different colors. Since the gameplay is simplistic, there is no real need for changes or settings, as nothing is time-based or based on reaction. Stress should be minimal for those who need longer times to absorb a situation, or may have issues with carpal tunnel or dexterity, as they can take a short break and not have an issue. The only suggestion I have is to perhaps create a journal or method to extend the text prompts so that those who need more time can read it, although the text is short enough and appears long enough that anybody who needs more time to read should be able to keep up. For a final score, I give the gameplay a 28 out of 35, the story a 4 out of 5, the sound a 4 out of 5, the mechanics a 30 out of 30, tutorial a 4 out of 5, the UI, UX a 5 out of 5, graphics 5 out of 5, and accessibility 5 out of 5. Overall, I'll give the game a 4 out of 5. The game tells a simple story with an unprecedented ending. It has beautiful scenery and is short enough to not overstay its welcome. The relationship with the cat is not fully developed, but there's enough to make sense. A few sections do linger on too long or have confusing resolutions, but it's not really severe to cause an issue. The sounds are nice and realistic, although the music could be more prevalent to fill in the empty space while walking. I would recommend this to anybody who likes walking simulators, but obviously would hardly recommend it to anybody else. I looked at the trophy list and saw some things for secrets that I missed, so there was some extra stuff and potentially more story, but it was vague to me that I could interact with anything besides the main story obstacles. I doubt that any of these secrets would change the gameplay enough to have tough challenges, like, jump 50 lily pads in a row, so I doubt that they had any new elements to the game to make it more appealing to anybody besides those who like a nice walk in the park with a horrific end to their day. Jesus. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. Other than that, I will see you next time. Walete, omnes.